Unfortunately, Sandra Rojas Nossa can't make it in person today, so this is going to be a Zoom lecture. So Sandra's going to give us some more information on establishment and management globally. So Sandra, if you can continue there then, please.
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you for the invitation. And my apologies because I have to be there, but the flight companies didn't allow it. So I'm going to talk about Asian hornet establishment and management globally. So hornets of the genus Vespa are quite impressive, well-armored social insects native to Asia and Europe. These social insects with colors black, brown, yellow, orange have also arrived and colonized new regions. Hornets belong to the family Vespidae, which makes part of the group of stinging Hymenoptera, Aculeata. This is a group of insects behaviorally diverse, encompassing both solitary and eusocial species, and exhibiting a variety of life history strategies, including parasitism, predation, omnivory, and polynivory. Other insects that belong to this group are ants and bees, which share many biological traits with hornets, but with some difference that we will see now. Some of these differences are between bees and wasps. I wanted to have a parallel with bees because we have knowledge about bees, so I wanted to remark the differences with them. So bees have a specialized tongue to drink nectar. Often it is a very long tongue, while wasps and hornets have very powerful mandibles and short finger-like tongues. This makes a little bit of difference in the way that they process food. Also, bees have a diet specialized in flowers. They gather protein from the pollen of the flowers and carbohydrates from the nectar. On the other side, wasps are generalists. They take protein from hunting and scavenging. And this is going to be one of the more important traits of wasps and particularly of hornets for the impact they have on bees and on biodiversity. In general, vespids are a successful invasive species which have been transported intentionally or unintentionally by humans, establishing and expanding to distant regions around the globe for a long time. They impact ecosystems and people. If we analyze the cumulative number of species that have been introduced outside their range, we see an increasing tendency across the last century following industrialization, trade of goods, and transport of people. It is the case of common species of the genus Vespula, Polistes, and Vespa, native to Europe and Asia, being transported to far regions. On the left, we see the regions where two species of the genus Vespula, Vespula germanica, and here Vespula vulgaris, where the regions where they are native are in green dot, and the regions that they have invaded are in red dots. In the case of Vespula germanica, there are invasive populations in North America in similar latitudes to the native regions to Europe. However, in the case of vulgaris, the species is surprisingly adapted to live in environmental conditions on opposite latitudes of the Earth, considering that these animals have to synchronize with the new environment to be able to live in seasons that are 6 months of delay and with a completely new biological interaction network. This is quite impressive, adaptative in the biology of these animals. Okay, focusing a little bit more on hornets within the Vespidae family. So we have again our Vespa genus. This genus has 22 species, here the phylogenetic relationship among them, and of these species, 21 are naturally distributed in Asia, 1 in Europe. Of these 22 species, 6 of them are invasive or neonative to other regions. When we talk about invasive alien species, are these organisms that are introduced either accidentally or intentionally outside their native range, their native region, with serious negative consequences for biodiversity, for economic sectors, and for human health. A little bit different concept is that one of the neonative species, which is winning more and more attention. The term was recently introduced by Essel and collaborators in 2019 and referred to a range expanding of species that track human-induced environmental changes. Does not necessarily imply the arrival to new regions, but they gain more terrain when the climate is changing and favoring the conditions for them. In this graph here, we see the regional species pools, meaning the size and relative contributions of different species in the region. In green, we see the native species, meaning that they are in their historic range. Here we see along our history as humans, as species, that the agricultural revolution promoted a difference, meaning that the alien species began to appear. We began to move the species on the lands. Of course, a big important event was also the Columbian exchange caused by the arrival of Columbus to America, and produced a widespread transfer of commodities, culture, human populations, technology, diseases, ideas, and mostly precious metals, plants, and animals between the New World in the Americas and in the Western Hemisphere in the Old World, Afro-Eurasia. So in the Anthropocene, meaning that it is the period of our history when we were able to change globally the conditions of the environment, began to appear the neonative species. And this is a relatively new concept. It is still in discussion in the scientific literature. So we have, let's back to our hornet scenario with 6 species of hornets currently colonizing new regions of the planet. On the left maps, we see that the presence of the species before the year 2000 was basically their native range, but in the last 20 years, the number of records of the species into new regions increased importantly. The first reported case of invasive species is the European hornet, Vespa crabru, that was intentionally introduced in the 9th century, about 1840 in New York, as a biological control agent against forest-damaging caterpillars. It expanded and became an invasive species and now is present across the whole Atlantic coast of North America. However, there are not reports of sectors that are particularly affected by European hornets, only damages on young trees when the hornets bite the bark to drink sap or collect materials for the nest, and of course, stinging of people. Other species such as Vespa velutina, we are going to talk a lot about this in the following slides. Other species is Vespa orientalis, which is a problem in the south of Italy and Spain and France nowadays, coming also from Asia and the Mediterranean region. But because it was a movement between a region, we consider that this is a neonative species for the Mediterranean. but in some countries is already considered an invasive species. We have also here in Spain populations of Vespa bicolor, invasive species. It is not causing big impact at the moment. There is no big alarm with this species, but unfortunately, we don't have a centralized monitoring system for these populations in Spain. So we are not aware of the increase or decrease in these three populations at the national level. Spain is a particular case we are going to talk about later. And another important species as invasive species in terms of the alarm for the people, because it is a huge hornet and very aggressive, is Vespa mandarinia, which colonized the Pacific coast of North American Canada. And another example is Vespa tropica in the Guam Island. So a little bit more focus now on the species Vespa velutina or Asian hornet. But as we saw right now, there are several Asian hornets. So I prefer to talk about the species and name it by the scientific name. So we talk about biology, then impact for peace. Okay, so some sociality and reproductive traits of this species facilitate the invasion process. One of them is that queens or giants are fecundated by several males, which means that they have a diversity in the family, and that one female can travel alone, being fecundated, and produce a whole new population, which means that the minimum propagule is able to produce a large-scale invasion. Also, eusociality confers these animals the capacity to arrive to new regions and be successful. This eusociality includes the repartition of tasks in castes, learning capacity, communication capacity that provides efficiency in the use of resources and adaptation to the new environments, and also the fabrication of a protective nest that provides them with more capacity to overcome difficult situations in the environment. Another important aspect of their biology is different from the bees because they have an annual cycle. It means that all the colony lives 1 year, while the bees, they stay for long as a colony. In this annual cycle, there are two phases. One is the solitary phase, in which the queen lives alone and takes care of all the activities alone. And after the emergence of the first workers begins the social phase. The solitary phase begins in the spring now with the awakening of the queens from dormancy. The queens make what we call a embryo nest and brings all resources needed for the construction of this nest, gathers from the environment the resources for her and to produce eggs and feed the larvae, and provide also conditions for the brood, such as warming a little bit the larvae, and takes care of the larvae by herself. Approximately 40 days after the emergence of the first workers, this changes and the queen stays in the nest, and are the workers, which are females, those in charge of bringing fibers to construct the nest, to make it growing and growing, to feed the larvae, to provide water for all biological necessities of the colony, and in general, bringing food and resources. This occurs along spring and summer. And often when the place is not big enough, or the colony decides to change the place, occurs a relocation of the nest. So in this social phase, we can have a primary nest, this first nest, and then they can move to a secondary nest. In Spain, some people is talking about a tertiary nest, but I don't know too much about that. It hasn't been scientifically contrasted. While this colony grows and grows in terms of the space they have and in terms of the number of individuals, it can have until 6,000 individuals an average nest along the season. And the maturity of this colony, meaning that new reproductive individuals are produced, males and new foundresses. In this period occurs the foundation of the nest, at the end of the summer and the beginning of the autumn, and afterwards the colony dies and only queens, fecundated queens, hibernate to fulfill a new cycle. Is this moment when most control activities are made because the colony relies on one only individual. It is also worth to note that the primary nest locations are principally found in man-made constructions, while the secondary nests are mainly found in trees. Okay, so let's see why these hornets are a matter of worrying for beekeepers. This growing of the population implies that they need a lot of food. They need a lot of prey and protein to feed the larvae, to feed new individuals in the colony. And bees are, of course, an ideal prey for them. And they have also biological traits that make them be good hunters of our bees. Okay, this is a video of how hornets are hunting the bees here. And sadly, bees' defenses are not effective to reduce the predation of hornets. They try, similar to what the Asian honeybees do, but they are not effective, especially when there are so many hunters in front of the hive hunting one after one bee. They just are not able to cope with that. We are going to talk in depth of this thematic, but I wanted to explain you a little bit what is going on in hives. So we made an experiment to test the effectiveness of one method, the electric arcs, and at the same time studying the performance of honeybee colonies in two treatments. One treatment was some hives without any protection, so Vespa velutina could hunt the honeybees throughout the spring and summer, and other treatment in which we set a set of electric arcs, like this. These are the electric arcs, a frame and some wires that produce electric discharge where the hornet stays. Afterwards, she wakes up, crawls until a bottle or dies. And we saw that these devices are effective to reduce the predation, to reduce the negative impact on hives. We saw also that in different places, the number of hunters is different. This can be because there are different numbers of nests around the apiary. Basically, that is our hypothesis. For that reason, it's important for beekeepers to try to find and destroy all nests around the apiaries. Okay. Our conclusions with this study was that hunting pressures induces the paralysis of the colonies. This means that the colonies, when they are under predation pressure, of several weeks, of 2 to 3 hornets in front of the hive, they just give up fighting, give up going outside, and they stay into the hives. They don't go for food. They don't for resins, water. They don't clean the hive. They don't do anything outside the hive, the box. So this means to the colony that they are impoverished. Also, we saw the workers that are going to overwinter have less weight, and they don't have enough resources. As a consequence of this whole process, the 30 to 50% of colonies just die during the winter or in the spring. This energy that the colony needs to wake up and to grow in the spring, it is just too much for them. They came too weak to be able to grow and to have a new year, a new season. Because of that, we have significant higher mortality in the regions where Vespa velutina is hunting. What happened when it came? So this is a species native to Asia, to Southeast Asia, tropical and subtropical regions such as Indonesia, Indochina, and Taiwan. There are several subspecies of Vespa velutina. The one who came, it is Vespa velutina nigrithorax. It arrived first to central France. It also arrived to South Korea in similar years. And from South Korea, it jumped to Japan, where it's also causing important impacts on biodiversity and on beekeeping. And lately, it arrived to the Atlantic coast of the United States. It is still not known, so far as I know, if this population in the United States came from Europe or from Asia. But we know that these invasive populations in South Korea and in Europe are the independent events. And we also know that it was one female from East China, probably Zhejiang or Jiangsu provinces, that came fecundated by several males, meaning that the minimum propagule traveled and was successful to produce the whole invasion in Europe. This invasion began in the center of France, more or less, in 2004. From there, the first years, it grew up, following the capacity of the species to disperse and to colonize new regions. It arrived to Spain in 2010, then to Portugal and Belgium the next year, also in Japan from the South Korean population. Then in 2014, it arrived to Italy, Germany, 2016 in UK and Belgium. Afterwards, Netherlands and Switzerland, Luxembourg, then Ireland, but we hope it is not a stable population there. Then last year appeared also in Hungary, Czech Republic, and that case of the US I just said, and lately to Austria. This is the cumulative number of records in different new countries along the years until last year, but because this is not here still because it is a quite new report. As you see, it was yesterday, while I was trying to get to you. The Standard is a local newspaper for Austria, reported that in Salzburg was one female, one queen, observed and captured. It entered into a laboratory of a clinic, and they captured it. It was a queen, but they are analyzing the specimen and had news coverage. Okay, so this is quite an. We can add another spot here in Austria. So this is the current situation until January this year of how expanded is this species in Europe. In 20 years, expanding across Western Europe is quite impressive. It is a quite impressive animal. Okay. Another important thing to understand this quite impressive capacity to expand is that it make long distances jumps, meaning that it is still being transported by people. And this is going to be quite important afterwards when we talk about management options, because we have to take care of this. We have to consider this when we make our management plans. For instance, they jumped from France to Portugal. It wasn't a progressive expansion. It jumped and new regions, and they these areas with presence just merged together, as we are going to see in other slides. Also to the UK jump, obviously, and Hamburg too, Ireland too. In Mallorca, they had 2 events of incursions from different regions. In 2015 from Italy and 2021 from Catalonia. Last year in Hungary, we still don't know from where, but it jumped for sure. Also Czech Republic and Austria. So this was a paper that Vilema and collaborators produced in 2011. And they predicted climatic suitability distribution maps for a Vespa velutina with data from native and invaded regions. And basically, of this prognostic, it is already present in several of these potential areas of the northern hemisphere. If it is going to be colonized, for instance, in the southern hemisphere, it is a matter probably of time, but we still don't know. We hope we won't know. So in Galicia, in the region where I've been working the last almost 20 years now, but from 2016, I began to work with this problem here with the beekeepers. This is the progression in the number of nests in our territory. It began with 2 nests in 2012, one in the north and another in the south. And this reddish area began to grow up until these northern and southern populations became a single region red. And by 6 years after that, almost the whole Galicia was covered with the presence of this species. Officially, data say that there are less than 1 nest per square kilometer, only based on citizen science reports. But our estimate is that the real nest density is around 14 to 17 nests per square kilometer. This year was provided by the press. I'm still waiting for the numbers from the administrations to have this number more accurate. Well, what happened also a similar situation in Portugal. In Portugal, they also observed a similar behavior of the population across the years. This is in the population more or less near to Galicia, and the progression from one single point or few points through the coast and then to the interior. In France, they also observed a similar pattern with a rapid population growth and an apparent lack of intraspecific competition during the first 8 years of invasion. There, the cumulative number of nests had an increasing tendency linearly during these first 8 years, concluding that in this period, the intraspecific competition is not a mechanism that reduces the population numbers in terms of nests in the areas. Okay, so let's go to management. Well, this process of invasion has 3 important moments. The first one is the introduction, in which species are transported into new regions. New propagals arrive and are not notorious for people unless there is a coordinated plan with monitoring and awareness of stakeholders and citizenship to detect them. Then comes the establishment of the species, in which the survivors persist and reproduce successfully, still with low populations, but soon it increases logarithmically. And this is noticed when it begins to impact biodiversity, health, and economic sectors. This is the last phase of spread and growing of the populations in the landscape, and impacts are observed. Often in invasive species, we talk about the rule of 10, which is from 10 species that are introduced, only one has success for establishing. Then from 10 which established, only one has successful spreading and becoming an invasive species. This can change in the current global scenario of climate change, because species are finding more suitable environments in regions that before maybe they weren't. Okay, so we are going to talk about a similar scenario also across the years and time. But, and this is the exponential curve that I just talked about. But now I want to add some other information on this. Here is when the species is absent, and this means that the area infested is increasing, and of course the control costs are also increasing while the area is bigger and the population is bigger. It makes sense. So we talk about 4 different activities or parts of management according to the species in which phase is going on this process. The first one is prevention, of course, preventing that the species come into a region. Then eradication, when this population is still very, very low. Then containment, trying to keep this population in the lowest levels we can. And then it is a moment where only long-term management activities are suitable, because it is impossible sometimes to eradicate any species. If we overlap this model with the data from Nesta showed some slides ago for Galicia, we can see that the lack of suitable management plans here and that the species found favorable conditions made us to lose this small window of opportunity to eradicate it, or at least to contain this rapid growth of the species in our territory. For instance, the awareness of beekeepers began here when only long-term activities were more possible. They began to understand, to be aware. That was just too late. And in this year, the European regulation included the species as an invasive alien species of union concern. Also a little bit late, and still is being in the same category. So what happened to us, like happened to this little fellow, is that he was aware of the predator and we were aware of the predator when it was already upon us, too late. Okay, so let's back to the different management options according to the level of the population, invasive population, and to the time occurred since introduction. This is before introduction. So prevention is the first principle of integrated pest management approach. Of course, like a sickness, you have to prevent to be sick. It is easier and less costly than curing. The main activities in this option is control imports, monitoring, make quarantines, and education of people, of stakeholders, and also of politicians, because that is one of the problems I see in this invasive species problem. An example of the USA. This is a paper produced some years ago from USA researchers, in which they say that there have been into 8 years close to 15 interceptions of Vespa hornets and Vespula. Half of them were hornets, and many species were observed in the ports where they found them. One of the interceptions of significance was an entire nest of Vespa mandarinia containing leaf brood and pupae that was sent via express courier from Asia. So education is for everybody, needed for everyone. And also it is an example of how many interceptions, and imagine these were observed, these were detected, by how many are not detected. Another management option, the next step is early detection, which in countries or areas not yet colonized by Vespa velutina, surveillance strategies could contribute to early detecting the arrival of the species for attempting an eradication of the populations at early stages of invasions. That is quite important. Then citizen science projects were specifically developed for monitoring Vespa velutina in several countries worldwide. Some important activities include the collection of reports through citizen science. Also, as we see here, based on website solutions where citizens can report their observations, and some specialists can say, yes, this was the species or not, and all this helps during early detection practices. This is a photography that Pete Kennedy shared some days ago in a group. That is also quite important to know. Education is also important here, of course, to know what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. He set here a picture of a very easy way to monitor the species, and I found this is great, because you can be in your home, in your place, while you are monitoring and observing what is really going on there. This is a weak pot with an attractant and just in your window, so it is part of the landscape and your daily activities. I found it brilliant. And there are many other activities. Okay, so content eradication and containment, the example of Mallorca, meaning that removing all present nests are necessary. The observation of multiple hornets spraying in apiaries or feeding in flowers is an indicator of the presence of a colony in less than 1 kilometer of distance. Once discovered, colonies of Vespa velutina could be dissected and analyzed for assessing their reproductive output and understanding what is going on in this region. And follow-up monitoring in the subsequent years should be performed to confirm if the species was eradicated or not. In Mallorca, in the Balearic Island, they had a nest in 2015. Then the population grew up, but after a successful and complete plan for management, they managed to eradicate the species after 3 years or 4 years after the first sighting. citizens, administrations, technicians, universities were involved in this plan. And then they found another nest in 2021. They analyzed this genetically and they concluded that it was a new entrance from Catalonia. This was more related to the Italian population. So to detect nests, we have different methods like triangulation, the Jersey method that you might know quite well, or Bob Hawks is quite a hero on that. Also, we produced methods to calculate the areas where there are many nests. Is too difficult to provide to do just simple triangulation, so we had to complicate the things with the complication of our problem. Also, nest detection via radiotelemetry, and thanks to the Atlantic Positive project, we were able to work together with the team of the Exeter University, with the University of Vigo, and produced some improvements on the techniques to detect with radiotelemetry. The Italians are also good in harmonic radar use to detect nests. And then afterwards, the nests had to be destroyed and ideally taken down from the original place in cases where these nests have a toxin. After some years, only long-term management is viable. In this period, education, surveillance, control methods to reduce the impacts are necessary or advisable, including nest destruction, protection of apiaries and other vulnerable sectors, also protection of vulnerable people, like allergic or some works that need protection. There have been different methods proposed, and they have advantages and disadvantages. Traps imply that there are a lot of bycatches, at least with the traps we have scientifically tested so far. I recently published this study comparing 4 types of traps, and I found that this model was the less worse performance, had the less worse performance with regular effectiveness to capture Vespa velutina and regular also selectiveness capturing others non-target taxa. Meaning that in this A trap, 10 non-target individuals were captured for each Vespa velutina captured. This is still a little low selectiveness. We need to contrast this with new models that we still don't know scientifically how they are working, but our aim is to avoid bycatch. It is good maybe to capture some queens, definitely, but avoid bycatch. Well, some measures, some devices that help to reduce the predation pressure in the hives are muzzles that are not capturing hornets, but they reduce the stress for bees and they don't get paralyzed so easy. The ARPs that I talked some slides ago, or moving the hives to regions where they are not, but this is not feasible for most beekeepers. Okay, other sectors that are being impacted by the species is the one-yard sector. The hornets damaged around 11% of the yields here, and they are trying to use some mesh to cover the grapes to avoid the damages by the hornet. Other fruits that are being damaged by Vespa velutina are apples, pears, figs, plums, peaches, blackberries, and blueberries. And probably it is not only the damage the direct damage of the fruit itself provided by the hornet in the summer, but also through reduction in the population. This has to be contrasted, but this is my hypothesis. Fruit sector and fruit in general in the nature is being impacted by these two processes. Of course, societal impacts, higher pressure on health system and fear in the populations, and use of non-selective methods that affect biodiversity affects indirectly also society. And other impacts that are not yet quite understood is the loss of cultural assets. We have here in Galicia and Asturias traditional beekeeping, and these beekeepers are just leaving the beekeeping because it is not, they can't fight against hornets, so cultural assets are being lost. More knowledge is needed to improve these management options, to know what is going on in the biology of the animal, knowing more about activities of monitoring eradication, and particularly to provide these plans for regions that different stakeholders talk about that and decide about that with the knowledge of others. I've been in different efforts at the national level, and we were not heard by the ministry. And this happens every day in many regions. I know that Germany is also a region when politicians maybe don't want this hot potato, and that make the situation harder for people that are aware of the problem that is coming. So other helping could be understand impacts on economy, because maybe taking numbers and showing numbers will help to make them to use their ears. And of course, impacts on ecosystem services are one of the biggest gaps in our knowledge. So we need more research too, and we need comprehensive studies about all these aspects. Finally, I want to say thank you for the organizers of this event, for the Beekeepers, Wheelchair Beekeepers Association, Junta de Galicia. I'm working currently in this center of integrated center for professional formation in Agrancia, and thank you, Pete Kennedy, helping me for this presentation, to all colleagues and universities participating in the Atlantic Positive, all researchers, university administration, and people helping me for getting all this knowledge that I wanted to share with you today. And thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. That's a brilliant lecture in the second language. We're very grateful for that, Sandra. It's an excellent presentation. Thanks very much. If anybody's got any questions, please look for 5 minutes of question time.
The question is about whether there's any relationship between Asian hornets and any other bee diseases. And in my mind, I'm thinking of your study where you looked at different Asian hornet sort of pressures in different apiaries, and you were assessing them with Julio in regard to levels of disease in those colonies.
Yeah, that is quite a question that we want to answer, but we haven't found so far direct. I think there is one person doing one research with that, and probably in the next few months we're going to answer this question, but so far I have no information on that.
Okay, thank you. Sandra, do you need me to repeat the question?
Yes, I can.
It's about the jump in Asian hornet distribution when they suddenly appear a long distance from the invasion front. how do we know where they have come from? Is it genetic analysis or something that informs that?
Genetic analysis, comparison genetics, some markers on the different populations. We have that luck now that we have the tools and we have already the experience, and we have also different specimens from different regions that can help us to do that job more efficiently.
Okay, what's been the impact on European hornets in Galicia due to the Asian hornets?
In Galicia, there are no studies about that. Galicia is also geographically diverse, so there are different abundances in the coast than in the interior. But what I hypothesize is at least an impact when bycatches occur in traps. I think it is an indirect effect of trapping, trying to kill Vespa velutina, that we are trapping Vespa cravo. Sadly, we don't have numbers of before the arrival of velutina to compare with the current numbers on the current population or distribution of the species. So that is an hypothesis, but we have no evidence.
Thank you. I might just add, so in Galicia, where there are very high densities, in particular in urban environments, that's where the focus of a lot of the attention is. And there's a study done by a student who was working in Sandra's group, who actually looked at nest densities of Asian hornets in forests, and actually found that there were more nests in those forests than the authorities necessarily assumed. That's not to say that they're more abundant in forests and urban areas. It's just, for the main part, people will assume that they don't really go into the forest. But they are there, and they are reservoirs there. And as forests are more the habitat that European hornets occupy, it's possible that there might be an interaction there, but it's just not been studied very much so far. Sandra, so the question was, what is the trigger for a nest to start producing gynes in the autumn? Do you know of what environmental or otherwise colony-related trigger there might be?
It is believed that some changes in the pheromones or physiological changes in the queen produce triggers all the process. They are leaking, the workers are leaking hair more in this period before the appearance of new funduses. But that is one of the aspects that need to be studied. Inside the colonies, we have no idea of what is going on from biological terms. That would be a very interesting question to answer.
Sandra, so the question is relates to potential impact on birds. Have there been many studies that looked at Asian hornet affecting sort of bird numbers?
There are two studies relating birds and hornets, Asian hornets. One is the European bee-eater, a prey bird specialized feeding on wasps, on larvae and nests of wasps. And it is migratory, so it overlaps in time and space in the summer and autumn with Vespa velutina here in Galicia. And the researchers have observed that the number of chicks of these nests of birds are higher in the last years in the regions where Vespa velutina is present, suggesting that this increase in food Vespa velutina is one of their prey, and this increase in food produces changes in the population and in reproductive success. And also there has been a report of apis of the bee-eater feeding on Vespa velutina, which is also a good news as a biological help to reduce a little bit the numbers of Vespa velutina in the environment. None of them enough to be a controller, but every step helps. But also we have to consider that the changes in the prey of insects in general caused directly by Vespa velutina or indirectly through our methods to control it can be changing populations in insects, and that can affect populations of insectivorous birds as top predators or so. And also the use of toxin baits or the Trojans or the Judah killers. When beekeepers or other people set traps to kill the nests, they often use poison. And this poison can arrive also to birds that feed on the nests or feed on the individuals that have these toxins and can be affected, but that, so far as I know, that hasn't been studied. But it is a high possibility that this is occurring when the people use too many toxins.
Sandra, the question is about Mallorca, and there obviously was a successful eradication in Mallorca. Do you know what levels the Asian hornets reached in Mallorca before eradication was achieved?
Levels, number of nests?
Yep.
Yeah. Let me go back to that slide.
I think it was about 20 from memory, but
20.
you probably have the figures there.
Yeah. So first year one nest, second year 9 nests, and the maximum was 20 nests. We have to consider that Mallorca is quite a dry place. It's very few rivers or sources for water for the hornets. Vegetation is low, so the detecting the nests was relatively easier than is here, that we have commonly 30 meters high trees, and also it's an island. So yeah, these are the numbers, and these are the differences between. Also, the Mallorca is relatively far from the mainland where velutina is. It is quite extended here, and in Italy, where the two specimens, where the two populations came.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
I think that's all the questions. So
Okay.
thank you very much again, and I'll ask the audience again to show their appreciation.
Thank you.